right, hello. Have you had a good day? Yeah. Yay, excellent. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about myself. So I am a chemical engineer. Oh, there's some of you up there as well. Hello. I work in energy. I've worked in energy for the last 16 years. And I work for a company called RWE. And at the moment, I work on battery software. But I'm not going to talk about that today. So I'm also the author of the book that you've just been shown. And I want to tell you about our global energy systems, which is covered in the book, and just a few examples of where we've come from, where we're going. So I'm going to start at the very beginning of my life. I was born in Iraq, in Baghdad in Iraq, which is in the Middle East, I'm sure you all know. And when I was growing up, I remember that we had lots of power cuts. And that was quite challenging to have to cope with that. But when I was 11 years old, my family moved to the UK, and here we have a really reliable energy system. And in the UK, I did school and then went to university to study chemical engineering and started working in energy. And from there, I started to make sure that people had a reliable energy system, not like what I experienced when I was a child. And over that 16 years that I've been working in energy, I have realized that the energy system is a big puzzle. It's quite complicated, and I like to break it up into how we get, move, and use energy. So I put it into those three sections, and I want to tell you one example from each of those today. So starting with how we get energy, and I want to talk about wind. I haven't worked directly on wind farms, but I'm very interested in them. I've done a little bit of innovation work with them, and wind farms have been around for a very, very long time. And when we first started building them, we put them on land, and then engineers, scientists said, let's put these out at sea, where we have more space and they're not in the way of anybody. So I went to visit Rampion. This is an offshore wind farm off the south coast of England. There are 116 turbines out there. It is absolutely enormous and really great to see in person. I recommend you get out there if you can. You can take a boat trip out there. These types of turbines are fixed to the seabed, so they're a little bit like if you imagine like a lamppost is attached to the ground. These are attached to the seabed. And this is okay up to about 50 meters of water depth. Beyond that water depth, you need to do something else. And what you can then do, again, what engineers, scientists, people who work in wind did was to put these further out at sea and make them float. So I went to see a floating wind turbine. This one is in Norway. It's called Tetraspar. And from the surface, it looks the same as the last one. What you can't see is that it's in 200 meters of water depth. And underneath the surface, there is a keel and anchors and moorings that keep this thing attached to the seabed and keep it steady. And it means we can go further out to sea and capture more of that energy from the wind to help us with the energy transition. And I have to tell you, on the day that I went on this visit, I was very, very excited because it took me a long time to organize to go there. And we were on the boat. I was on the top deck waiting to get to the turbine. It took about 45 minutes or so. And when we got there, I went to the front of the boat and was looking at this thing and just gently swaying up and down with the waves. And had a fantastic time. But I did pay for it on the way back. As soon as the boat turned around, the seasickness hit me. I don't get that very often, so I didn't know how to deal with it. But yeah, I was fine once we got back to shore. And I would do it all over again, because seeing these turbines really, it gives me hope that we are going in the right direction. So these things produce electricity. They're in the middle of the sea. We need a way of moving that electricity to the end users. And I learned about this quite early on in my career. I was doing a work placement in a power station. And sometime around then, I also went to visit the National Grid's control room. So National Grid is a company in the UK that runs some of what's called the transmission cables. So they're things that look like this. They're pylons with cables on them. They move electricity up and down the country and in other places as well around the world. And in the UK, we have these types of cables that connect us to mainland Europe. So they go under the sea, connect us to Europe or to Ireland. And it means we can exchange electricity with each other at a very large scale. So we could have a globally connected system where we can change electricity with each other in the future. We also have mini versions of these called microgrids. So if you imagine if you had some solar panels, some shorter cables, maybe a diesel generator as backup, and a house or a community building or something, you could wire that all together and have like a mini version of this grid. These are useful in certain situations, like if you've had a natural disaster. So back in 2017 in Puerto Rico, there was a hurricane, Hurricane Maria, and it destroyed their electricity system, or these cables that move electricity around, and they were off power for months and months. And some of those communities decided to do something about it themselves. They put in these microgrids and got themselves back on power. So thinking ahead, wherever we go with the energy system, we will definitely need to move electricity around. And that might be in really, really giant grids, or it might be in small microgrids. So lots to do on how we move energy around. One of the things that we use energy for, not today, but in the winter, is heating. And there are people who are now switching from using gas for their heating to electricity. This is one end use of electricity that's growing at the moment. But if we think about the reason that we have to heat our homes in the first place, it's because that heat that we put into them is leaking out all of the time. It feels funny to do this today on such a hot day, but the same applies in hot countries who have to do air conditioning. So instead of changing that fuel that we use for heating, we should be thinking about how do we stop the heat from leaking out? How do we make our buildings more efficient? So that's with double glazing, insulation, how we design those buildings. And I saw an absolutely incredible example of this in a place called the Hockerton Housing Project. So one of my friends from school, his parents moved there, and he invited me to come and visit. And it's an eco-housing community. There are 5 houses there. The day that I went was a nice summer's day, and I went in, and it's a really lovely community, 5 houses, as I said. They have sheep that graze on the land, chickens that they've rescued from battery farms. They grow some of their own food. But the houses themselves, they all have solar panels on top. And the incredible thing about these homes is that there's no heating and no cooling, but they stay at a comfortable temperature. And it's because of how they've been designed. And the house looks completely normal when you go inside. There's everything you would expect, a kitchen and bathroom and living room, bedrooms, and so on. So it's all completely normal. But there are 3 things about these homes that make them efficient. So the first thing is how they are oriented in relation to the sun. So each house has a south-facing, triple-glazed conservatory. And in the UK, in the Northern Hemisphere, in the wintertime, the sun is low in the sky from the south. So if you have that conservatory facing south, you are capturing lots of heat from the sun in the winter. And then in the summer, so right now, the sun is above our heads and it avoids going into that house so the house can stay cool. So that's the first thing. Second thing is layers and layers and layers of insulation. So that keeps heat and cool inside of the house. And then the third thing are heat batteries, which sound very complicated, but in reality they are just concrete blocks that are built into that home. And if you have a warm evening, that concrete block will, if you have a warm day, the concrete block will absorb that heat. And then in the evening, when it gets a little bit cooler, the concrete will release that heat into the space and warm it up. So all those things together mean that the houses have a temperature of about 22 degrees in the summer, 18 degrees Celsius in the winter, so quite comfortable. And there is no fossil fuel involved in the generation of that heating or cooling. And I think this is how we should be designing our buildings. So there's lots to do in that space as well to improve how we design buildings. There's lots more examples in my book. These were just 3 things that I talked about in there. And we are in an energy transition right now. We are moving in the right direction. I would just say my message is that whatever we do next, it probably won't be perfect, but that's okay. I think we need to move forward and be ready to change when something else comes along that's even better, as long as we are on that right path that's away from a climate crisis. That's me. Thank you very much for listening, and have a good rest of the day.